The crunch of tires on the gravel road echoed, followed by a silence so complete it seemed to tear the air. A low-slung utility truck screeched to a halt in the middle of a deserted road, framed by dry grass and a sky washed out with heat haze. The passenger door was violently thrown open. A man stepped out, cradling a cardboard box. The man was sweating profusely. He scanned his surroundings, as if running from something, or perhaps, from himself. Without a sound, he hurled the box onto the ground, slammed the door shut, and hit the accelerator. What remained was a swirling cloud of dust and the sheer, violent act of abandonment. Inside the box, a thin, brown Alaskan Malamute struggled to lift her head. Her amber eyes were clouded, but the alertness had not left them. Shivering around her were 6 tiny lives. Still blind, the puppies whimpered barely audible cries, huddling together for warmth. The sun beat down relentlessly. There was no shade, no water, no breeze. Only the hot earth, the dry air, and the cries of the newborn lives. The mother tried to stand, but her legs buckled. Gathering the last of her strength, she clawed her way out of the box and slowly rotated her body, lying down to offer her withered teats to her pups. One by one, the tiny puppies instinctively sought their mother's warmth and gathered there. At the end of a road that led nowhere, 7 lives were left to fate. The mother dog had no way of knowing what would happen next. Miles away, overhead, a drone circled as part of an environmental conservation initiative. Its purpose was to monitor illegal dumping and clearcutting, but at that moment, the operator's eyes were glued to the monitor. A shadow on the ground, a movement, a box, something was wrong. Zooming in, he saw the mother and the puppies, the full scope of the scene. "Jake, look at this," he said into the radio, his voice thick with emotion. Less than 5 minutes later, a report was filed with the NGO they belonged to. Jake put down his unfinished coffee and grabbed the Jeep keys, his body moving before his mind could process. He had seen many tragic scenes before, animals hit by cars, burned, or poisoned. But this was different. In the footage, in the sight of a severely weakened body trying to protect lives barely brought into this world, there was something that pierced him deep in his core. The road was terribly rough, full of curves and potholes. Time was their enemy. By the time he reached the location, the sun had begun to dip, but the heat was still unbearable. And they were there. Just as he had seen in the video, but the reality was worse. The box was sinking into the dirt, and the puppies were barely moving. The mother dog noticed the sound of the engine. She lifted her head. A low, drawn-out growl escaped her tired chest. She didn't bark or move, but just stared at the stranger's every motion with those amber, watchful eyes. "It's okay, girl. I'm here to help," Jake said, slowly kneeling down. The smell of sweat, dust, and despair filled his nostrils. Jake took off his own shirt to create a makeshift shade over the puppies and took out a water bottle to wet the mother's mouth. She slowly lapped at it but immediately turned her nose back toward the puppies. The radio buzzed. They needed to evacuate immediately. The temperature was rising, and a brush fire had started nearby. Jake carefully picked up the puppies one by one, placing them back into the dirt-stained box. Then, as gently as if she were made of glass, he lifted the mother dog into his arms. Inside the Jeep, the air conditioning barely worked. In the passenger seat, the puppies cried. One of them, a tiny pup even smaller than the rest, had stopped moving. "Hang in there, little buddy. Please. Fight for it." At the NGO's base, the team was waiting. Water, 4 fluids, milk, and a shelter. People moved frantically, with cautious hands and bloodshot eyes. Jake, covered in mud and sweat, stood motionless at the entrance of the makeshift infirmary. He watched the mother, who, despite her dehydration, still tried to lift her head whenever she heard the puppies cry. It was as if she were saying, "I'm still here. They have me." One of the volunteers approached with a tired smile. "What's her name?" "Tala," Jake answered without thinking. "And the smallest one, the one we thought wouldn't make it, the one with the small patch on his nose? The weakest one? The one with that stubborn look in his eyes since birth? That's Ziggy." A moment of silence fell. But it was no longer the silence of abandonment. It was a silence filled with the anticipation of a new beginning, though still fragile and wounded. Jake did not yet know that his choice, to save 7 lives that had been stopped and forgotten, would soon cause ripples across the country. Tala got her first bath 2 days after the rescue. Until then, she had barely had the strength to stand, but her fever had begun to drop. The warm water slowly flowed over her body, washing away the mud and the solidified despair, revealing her original beautiful brown coat. It also exposed old scars and her heartbreakingly emaciated body. She didn't complain, only closing her eyes occasionally. That simple gesture felt like the first kindness she had received in a long, long time. Jake watched the scene from the doorway, arms crossed, seemingly trying to suppress overwhelming emotions. He knew this was no longer just a rescue operation. Since the moment he found her, there was something about this Malamute, a quiet strength, a silent scream, an exhausted dignity, that held him in an inexplicable grip. But he still didn't know who Tala was before she was left on that road. Gradually, the signs began to appear, the scars on her back, her reaction to the sound of work boots, her terror of ropes and loud male voices. Even a distant shout made Tala curl up, burying her head between her paws, trembling. There was something there, an old memory carved deeper than bone, a memory of fear. In the NGO's makeshift kennel, the puppies slept in a cushioned box, growing stronger day by day. Ziggy was the smallest, but his will to climb the edge of the box and search for his mother was the strongest of all. It was as if his whole body was protesting, "Mom is mine," unable to accept separation. And the mother, weak as she was, always noticed. Just the sound of Ziggy stepping on the floor made Tala try to stand up. "You see that?" a volunteer asked. Jake nodded, his eyes never leaving them. They know. Even before they understand the world, they know who their blood family is, and who is love. Outside, the NGO's facility showed the faces of those fighting against despair, tarp roofs on warehouses, a makeshift infirmary built with donated supplies, fences made from repurposed lumber, and the constant cycle of reporting and rescuing. The exhausted team worked shifts, taking turns on sleepless nights. The smell of dog food, antiseptic cream, and hope were always blended together. Despite the lack of stable funding and the indifference of the authorities, they continued their work. And now, Tala was among them. "Jake, she's eating more now," the vet said. "She stays here," he replied without hesitation. "We won't look for adoption right away. She needs time. She needs safety." That night, laying a mattress in the corner of the infirmary, Jake remembered the first time he found an abandoned animal, a dirty kitten under a bridge when he was a kid. He tried to bring it home, but his father wouldn't allow it. It was the first time he felt the weight of helplessness. Now, he was an adult, and he could act differently. Outside, the sky was darkening. The wind picked up, and a storm was approaching. When Jake returned to the puppy's room, Ziggy was chewing at the box edge, trying to get out. He picked up Ziggy and carried him to his mother. Tala opened her eyes and lifted her head, and for a moment, the fear vanished. She slowly, ceremonially, licked the puppy's nose, and finally fell asleep. However, not everyone slept soundly. That night, the NGO's media team received the unfiltered drone footage. Raw, unedited, the man throwing the box, the sound of the utility truck speeding away, a close-up of the mother huddled over her pups. They decided to post it with a direct question: "This is what happened yesterday. And this is what continues to happen in America." Jake read it silently. Then he clicked the share button. By morning, the video began to spread like wildfire on social media, but no one there imagined the scale it would reach. Where are you watching this story from? Tell us in the comments. And if you're moved, please share it. At first, they considered it just one of many sad incidents, a cruel abandonment, but an isolated event. That was until Jake received a message. It was sent to the NGO's official line account from an account with no profile picture. It was an anonymous tip, but it contained an address, coordinates, and a short warning: "Not the first time. Check out that farm." The location indicated was less than 20 miles from the road where Tala was found. Jake checked satellite imagery and past records, feeling his stomach clench. The area matched old, uninvestigated accusations of animal cruelty. That same day, he gathered 2 volunteers and set off. The sky was still gray from the previous night's rain, and the deserted road was muddy. The utility truck moved slowly, the tires slipping on the curves, and the wind carried the smell of damp grass and something rotten. The air was heavy, and no one spoke. Arriving at the location, a rusty iron gate stood ajar. A dense silence permeated the property. Jake parked the vehicle first, started the voice recording on his smartphone in his pocket, and cautiously surveyed the surroundings. The farmhouse was empty, its windows boarded up. Behind it, a chilling sight unfolded. An area was covered with torn tarps and enclosed by makeshift fences and planks. At least 7 dogs were trapped there. Emaciated to bone and skin, some with missing patches of fur, others with a missing eye. Every dog was silent, as if they had forgotten how to bark. Jake closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and started filming. "Oh my God," one of the volunteers whispered. "This is a puppy mill." The ground was littered with bone fragments, empty cheap dog food bags, and buckets with black, stagnant water. In one corner, dead puppies; in another, a chain with a ripped collar. And at the edge of the makeshift kennel, they found the sign, a blue ribbon tied to a nail. It was exactly the same kind Tala had been wearing around her neck when she was rescued. The connection was clear. The same man who threw the box away so callously. Burning with anger, they returned to the NGO. Jake went straight to the coordinator's room, told them everything, and showed the video in details. The team entered emergency mode. They needed to act fast, file a formal complaint, and contact the authorities. But they knew the history of this region. Such accusations often died on paper. Something more was needed. "We make this public," Jake said, his eyes filled with determination. "Names, faces, everything. Are you sure? This could be a legal mess. What he did can't just end up as one more sad story." Meanwhile, Tala showed signs of recovery. Her gait was steadier, she accepted the fluids, and occasionally, she would give her unique, slight tail wag. Yet, something in her was still distant, as if she couldn't fully trust that this salvation was real. Still, every time she heard Jake's voice, she always turned her head. She was looking for him. And Ziggy was growing. He was still the smallest, the most curious, and the one who slept closest to his mother. He started chewing on fabric and running clumsily. Jake called him my little wingman. 2 days later, the video was released. The screen showed the abandonment footage. Then the farm dogs. Their living conditions. The close-up of the blue ribbon. And finally, a photo of the man, his full name, past accusations, and the caption, "This is the person responsible." The reaction was immediate. Within 24 hours, the post was viewed over 1 million times. Angry comments, demands for justice, and pledges of donations poured in. Newspapers began contacting the NGO, influencers shared the story, and people across the country spoke out. But the man saw it too, and he retaliated. The next day, he appeared at the NGO with a lawyer. "You defamed me," he said, his voice hard. "You will pay the price for this." Jake stood his ground, meeting his gaze directly. He didn't answer. He simply took out his smartphone and showed him the abandonment footage. Frame by frame. The man looked away. The confrontation was public, and Tala's story was no longer just hers, it had become an American story. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. The threat of a lawsuit, the lawyer's arrogant demeanor, the owner's cruelty in discarding Tala like trash, it all burned him like a fever. He knew that even with witnesses and evidence, justice could be slow and sometimes flawed. And the feeling of helplessness began to torment him again. In the NGO office, volunteers were strategizing. They needed to file a police report, gather legal support, and release more evidence. But the system was cold to those without funds. There were too many loopholes, too much red tape, too much silence. One detective even suggested that the video evidence alone might be insufficient and possibly fabricated. Fabricated? Jake repeated in disbelief. "Are you saying Tala's whimpers are fabricated? The puppies under the sun? That filthy kennel?" The phones wouldn't stop ringing, reporters, supporters, and anonymous tips. But there was no call from the police. No official appeared at the farm. The dogs were still trapped there, slowly dying. 2 days later, Jake tried to go to the location again, but the gate was secured with a new padlock. A guard from a private security company appeared, a radio clipped to his hip. "Private property. You're trespassing. Owner's orders. The dogs inside are dying." "That's the owner's problem. I'm just doing my job." Jake kept filming anyway. From behind the fence, one of the dogs noticed him. It began to howl, a drawn-out, desperate sound of pain. He returned to the NGO feeling defeated. That night, Tala developed a fever. She was shivering and whimpering. Even next to Jake, who was sleeping on a mattress on the infirmary floor, her condition didn't change. Ziggy never left her side. "She's feeling everything," the vet said. "The stress, the fear, the knowledge that it's not over." The next day, the other puppies started showing signs of illness. One of them, the second smallest, stopped eating. Jake knelt by his side for hours, trying to get him to lick milk from a syringe. "Come on, little guy. Fight for your mom, fight for yourself." The puppy didn't respond, only shivering. His body was too weak to resist. The NGO put out an urgent call on social media. They needed medical aid, donations. It was a race against time, and against the continued abandonment happening outside. But the counterattack was something no one expected. On Saturday morning, a cease and desist letter arrived at the NGO. It demanded the immediate removal of the video showing the man's face and name, citing invasion of privacy and defamation. Jake read the document, took a deep breath, and walked into Tala's room. Her eyes were half closed, her breathing shallow. Ziggy was sleeping beside her. Jake sat next to them, silent. The outside world was trying to erase everything, to pretend nothing had happened. But right there, on the concrete floor, he saw the truth, alive and dying. "We won't take it down," he said in a low voice. "Even if it costs everything." Then, an idea struck him, a live broadcast. Uncut. Unedited. No filter. Show America the reality, the struggle, live. Show the dogs still trapped, the legal threats, Tala's deterioration, and the sick puppy's state. Show it all. That night at 8 p.m., Jake started the live broadcast, holding Ziggy in his arms. The lighting was harsh, and his eyes were raw from crying. "This is the story they want to erase," he addressed the camera directly. "This is a dog who was discarded like trash. This is one of her dying puppies. And this is the system that tells us all of this might be fabricated." The viewership soared. Within minutes, it reached tens of thousands. Comments exploded, hearts flew across the screen, the pain transmitted through the lens. But just as the nation was beginning to grasp the seriousness of the situation, the sick puppy passed away in Jake's arms, live on the stream. The whimpering ceased, and in that silence, America felt the weight of a pain that had lasted much longer than the broadcast. The death of the puppy in Jake's arms spread like a wildfire. Within hours, the live stream was viewed millions of times. Angry hashtags trended, #SaveTala, #StopPuppyMills, #Ziggy is alive. People who had never spoken about animals cried watching the video, wrote letters, and pressured politicians. But the internal pain was inconsolable. When the vet entered with tears in her eyes to receive the tiny body, Jake wouldn't let go. Just one more minute with him. Tala brought her nose to the puppy. A short whimper escaped her, like a farewell. The NGO became the eye of the storm. Reporters were camped outside the door. News outlets demanded interviews. Finally, the district attorney called, stating they were carefully reviewing the case. Politicians began commenting. One of them posted an outraged message but deleted it hours later due to pressure from a powerful local figure. But inside the NGO, the reality was different. 5 puppies were still critical, and Tala drifted between lucidity and total listlessness. The puppy's death seemed to have taken something away from her. That night, Jake didn't leave the room. Tala refused food. Ziggy licked her mouth, trying to wake her up. The other puppies whimpered quietly, as if sensing a great threat looming over them. It was then that Jake broke down. He cried harder than he could remember since his mother's funeral, a mix of rage, the pain of it all, the injustice, and the indifference that always seemed to win. His cries were heavy and racking. "I'm trying, Tala. I swear. I'm trying." She lifted her head. A bare minimum of movement, but she looked at him for a moment. The same look of resolve she had on the deserted road, protecting her pups with her body, shone again. That was enough. The next morning, Jake held an impromptu press conference on the NGO grounds. He didn't want political performance or spectacle, but he had to show them, he had to scream. They tried to silence us with legal notices. They tried to lock the gate with a new padlock. But there is one thing they cannot lock away, the truth. He showed the footage of the dogs still trapped at the farm. He released anonymous recordings from an employee talking about the abuse. He showed invoices for illegal puppy sales. It was all there. The emotional plea in front of the cameras turned into national outrage. Celebrities began sharing the live stream. An investigative reporter contacted Jake, saying he was preparing a front-page expose. And that afternoon, the news came that no one expected. A court order was issued, allowing the NGO immediate access and rescue operations at the farm. Jake threw everything aside and rushed there with the team. The road to the farm felt longer than before. When they arrived, the gate was still locked, but a court bailiff was waiting. They simply had to present the documents. The padlock was cut. Beyond the gate, the stench of urine, feces, flies, and terror hung in the air. The dogs were skeletal, their fur patchy, their eyes sunken. Some barked desperately, others only whimpered. There were clusters of puppies in boxes without light, and one female dog had swollen teats and open wounds on her hind legs. Jake documented everything. "This is what they called a business," he said, his voice choking. With every animal carried out, it was a small victory and a cruel reminder of how much had been overlooked. The farm owner did not appear, sending only a lawyer to silently observe. By the end of the day, 27 dogs had been rescued. Jake returned to the NGO with a heavy heart. In Tala's room, he saw Ziggy lying on his mother's body like a warm blanket. The other puppies were calm. "I got them out of that place," he whispered, kneeling down. But it's not over yet. For the first time in days, Tala gave her breed's characteristic tail wag. A light, almost imperceptible gesture. But in this shelter filled with pain and hope, it felt like seeing the sunrise after a month-long storm. The next day brought unbearable sadness. Tala was different. Physically, she was recovering, but something seemed to have vanished from her eyes. The rescue, the uproar, the legal victory, nothing seemed enough to fill the void that consumed her. Toward the end of the morning, the vet rushed in. "Jake, we need to talk." He followed her into Tala's room, his heart constricting. "What is it?" he asked, already knowing. She sighed. "Tala is in a deep state of depression. She is unresponsive. If we don't see an improvement in the next 48 hours, we have to consider euthanasia." Jake couldn't process the word. Euthanasia? How could they even consider that for the dog who fought to save her children while utterly exhausted? "We can't do that. Not now. Not after everything." "I know. But PTSD is real, Jake. She lost a child, and she lost faith in everyone and everything. She's shut down. If she doesn't respond, there's little we can do. We need to try therapy." But the pain cut Jake like a sharp knife. He knew the pain of being discarded, but seeing Tala so weak, so defeated, was a direct stab to his heart. He stood there silently, an unspeakable knot tightening in his throat. That afternoon, the team intensified the treatment: IVs, injections to stimulate appetite, frequent checkups. But Tala seemed indifferent. Jake never left her side. He lay on the floor for hours, reaching out to touch her dirty, thinning coat. But the connection he sought seemed to be slipping through his fingers with every passing moment. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were clouded, distant. As night fell, he decided to do something unimaginable. He placed his body next to hers on the mattress, gently touching her head, hoping she would feel that he was still there, that she was not alone. It was then he realized that what separated him from her was not just flesh but the pain, a deep, invisible pain that could not be soothed by petting, promises, or words. It was a pain he was only beginning to understand, and he didn't know how to alleviate it. Ziggy was also silent beside her. The small puppy who barely survived now seemed lost. Perhaps he sensed that his mother no longer recognized him. And as the night deepened, the tension became unbearable. Jake knew a phone call could come at any moment, forcing a final decision about Tala. The weight of that choice began to crush him. "I promised, Tala," he choked out. "I promised I'd save you." It was a promise made in the heat of action, in the fight for survival. But what now? No strength, no answers, no certainty. Time now felt like it was slipping through his fingers. In the silence of the night, he waited for a miracle. But it didn't come. On the second day, the situation worsened. Tala was even weaker, her breathing ragged, her body limp. The time for a decision was imminent, and Jake no longer knew what to do. He stared at her, unshed tears welling up. And then something happened. In one last moment, as if hearing Jake's soul pleading with her, Tala lifted her head. She looked at him. And for a fleeting second, he saw life return to her eyes. Seeing it, something clicked inside him. There was still work to be done. He knew this wasn't the end. But before he could act, Tala lay back down limply, as if she had fought her last battle. Jake's pain seemed to double. What should he do if she no longer had the strength to fight? But in the midst of that darkness, he understood. Love was not a race against time, not a matter of winning or losing, but simply about staying. And he decided he would not let her go. Not yet. Not as long as there was one breath of life left in her body. The dawn of the next day brought a gentle, almost timid light, but it changed everything. Tala no longer seemed so distant. Still weak, her eyes began to glow faintly, as if she understood what Jake was trying to say but lacked the strength to respond. Jake himself was emotionally drained. But something in his chest kept him awake, alert, waiting. He was the first to notice the tiny movement. She moved a hind leg. It was a minuscule, barely noticeable shift, but in that moment, it was as if the earth had solidified again and the air was breathable once more. Jake couldn't suppress a small smile. It was the first true sign of recovery, the first step for Tala to return to the world. Tala was still in a fog of emotion, but the simple gesture of lifting her leg was an act of resistance. What seemed impossible was beginning to happen, like a thin thread of hope, but strong enough not to let the darkness prevail. "That's good, Tala. You got this," he whispered, almost like a prayer. The vet saw the small movement and smiled. "It's not a big change, but it's definite, Jake. It will take time. Don't rush her. But we are moving in the right direction." He nodded, though anxiety still churned in his chest. He didn't want to hope, but seeing that small movement, he felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. Life, however fragile, had not yet spoken its final word. The next day, Tala's improvement was more evident. She was still very weak, but her demeanor was beginning to change. When Jake entered the room, she was lying on her side, her head slightly raised. And when she saw him, her tail wagged slightly, an almost timid greeting. "She's starting to trust again," the vet said with a hopeful voice. "It might not look like much, but it's crucial." And so, Tala's recovery proceeded slowly. Progress every day, little by little. She began to eat, stood up for short periods, and interacted more with Jake. Ziggy, intensely devoted to his mother, never left her side. And the bond between the two grew stronger. It was as if they were both being reborn, learning to live again after a lifetime of suffering. Meanwhile, the story spread continued. The social media campaign sparked support demonstrations across the country. People resonated not only with Tala's pain but also with Jake's struggle, which became a symbol of resistance against animal abandonment and abuse. Pressure on the authorities intensified. The NGO's work was officially recognized, new investigations began into other abusive kennels in the region, and the movement grew to enormous proportions. The media, which had previously focused on the tragedy, now increasingly paid attention to Tala's change and the movement surrounding her. One day, Jake received a call. It was from one of the largest national newspapers. "We are planning a feature article on Tala's case. She has become a symbol. Could you tell us about her condition and the impact of this incident?" The reporter's voice was filled with empathy. Jake felt the weight of the question. Tala had become more than just one rescued dog. She was a metaphor for all the animals breaking down in the face of human indifference. "She is recovering," Jake replied with a confident but emotional voice. "It hasn't been easy, but she's going to be okay. And we will get through this together." He looked at Tala, who was lying next to him, watching him carefully, as if something important was happening. She was no longer the broken dog he found on the road, but the fight was not yet over. But now there was hope. The hope he had promised her, and that she had somehow accepted. Jake felt a warmth in his chest. The future was still uncertain, but with Tala by his side, he knew there was one thing that neither pain nor darkness could erase: the power of love. In the days that followed, Tala sought out contact with Jake more frequently. At first, she was still hesitant, observing him with a quiet wariness, as if afraid that loss might come again. But gradually, without rushing, with the patience only those who have experienced abandonment and pain can possess, she moved closer. Jake understood her more than anyone. Every look, every gesture he directed toward her was a silent promise that he would never leave her. He knew the healing process was not a straight line, that Tala's trust had to be rebuilt step by step. But he was there, every day, every moment, without hurry, without pressure. Their bond solidified not through grand gestures, but through the small, daily occurrences. One afternoon, as he sat on the couch working on his laptop, Tala cautiously approached. She lay down at his feet, watching him intently at first, but then relaxed. A deep, barely audible sigh. She closed her eyes and snuggled closer, a quiet sign of trust. Jake gently placed a hand on the top of her head. She didn't flinch. It was the first true gesture of confidence, and his heart clenched when he realized how much that small victory meant. As time passed, mother and son began to understand each other again. Ziggy, raised with all the love he could absorb, felt his mother's presence more strongly, and the small puppy played more actively with her. It was as if his energy could bring Tala back to life. They connected, they played, and the house, once joyless, was now filled with small, happy moments. Jake's dedicated care and the NGO's efforts began to show tangible results. Tala became increasingly active. Daily walks with Jake became sacred. The dog who once couldn't walk more than one step was now trotting down the street with new energy. She left the ghosts of her dark past behind. She walked next to Jake not as a burden, but as a companion, a friend, no longer afraid of abandonment. And Jake felt, with every step, the weight of his responsibility, not just as a caretaker, but as her redeemer. In her eyes, he found the strength to continue. The fear was still there, but now it was small compared to the trust the two were rebuilding. It was the regeneration of a broken soul, now slowly standing up again like a tree recovering after a storm. During one such walk, as the sun dipped low and the heat of the day gave way to comfort, Tala approached a park bench. Jake sat first, and she lay down next to him, resting her head on his lap. The sense of peace emanating from that moment was inexpressible in words. No more fear, no more anxiety, just the mutual trust between the two. "I know you understand me, Tala," Jake whispered. "I know we can get through this together." And in that moment, he realized that Tala's true recovery was not just coming from medicine or treatment. It came from the connection they were nurturing, from the quiet exchange of affection, from the silent afternoons where just being in each other's presence was enough. Healing was a shared journey, and Jake, with all his fears and uncertainties, swore he would be Tala's anchor, the presence she never thought she would find again. As dusk settled, Jake thought of Tala's struggle, how much she had overcome, and how, somehow, she had taught him the greatest lessons about patience and love. He knew now that it was all worth it. Not for the ending, but for the journey they had walked together, a journey that had irrevocably bound them. Tala, the dog who suffered so much, was now standing tall. And next to her, he knew their bond could never be broken. Their love was stronger than any abandonment, any pain. Finally, the moment arrived. After weeks of recovery, dawn walks, and quiet embraces, Tala and Jake's story reached its climax. The movement surrounding Tala's abandonment had become a national issue. It was no longer just about one stray dog, but about what the situation meant for an entire system that had undervalued the lives of animals. Tala's case was undeniable evidence of the cruelty of abandonment, the indifference of those in positions of protection, and the urgent need for change. Jake's voice, which had seen fear up close, was now heard. The pressure on authorities and the media was overwhelming. They could no longer ignore it. The breakthrough came on the last day of winter. After weeks of operation, the police and the NGO had gathered enough evidence to shut down the notorious puppy mill Jake had exposed. The owner, the cruel man who had discarded Tala on the road, was not only running a substandard animal facility but was also involved in an illegal dog trafficking network. The impact of the footage and testimonials was devastating. Jake was there, with Tala by his side, holding Ziggy. He didn't seem to fully grasp the importance of the moment, but he was there as a quiet witness to the journey they had overcome. They watched as the police entered the facility, and the sunlight filtering through the rusty bars illuminated the faces of the dogs being rescued. The dogs, somehow, seemed to recognize the freedom approaching. In the midst of the chaos, Jake saw the figure of the kennel owner. He was being led away by investigators, handcuffed. The look on his face was one of defeat. There were no words, just complete silence. Jake stared at him with the serenity that comes from the certainty that justice is being served. The words he recorded, the accusations on social media, had borne fruit. The man who tried to let Tala die on the roadside was now facing the consequences of his actions. This is just the beginning, Jake told himself. As the man was led away, he felt not anger, but a profound sense that what he had done symbolized something more than just saving one life. It symbolized the fight for the dignity of all living beings. As the operation ended and the dogs were transported to new shelters, Jake and Tala stepped back, finding a moment just for themselves. He crouched in front of her, reaching out his hand, waiting for her to approach. She watched the scene with quiet, settled patience. But when she looked at Jake, her eyes brightened, and in a slow movement, she stepped forward. It was a timid approach, but full of meaning. She was recovered, ready to live. "Let's go home, Tala," Jake said, his voice full of gratitude. "We're together now, always." The dog, who had regained her trust, nestled against his side. They walked toward the car for the new chapter of their lives. On the drive home, the town streets, which had once seemed empty, were now filled with a sense that justice had been done. Social media was flooded with messages of support and celebration. The nation celebrated the closing of the mill, but was also deeply moved by Tala's story, which had become a symbol of patience and hope. Back home, Tala seemed to understand the significance of what had happened. She lay down next to Jake as always, her head on his lap, but now there was a new lightness. It was as if she had finally found her place in the world. She was no longer the abandoned dog, she was a survivor, a victor, and a future of love and care awaited her next to Jake. In that moment, Jake knew that everything they had faced had turned into something more than he could have imagined. They had saved one life, but somehow, that life had also given him back something he thought he had lost. Time continued to flow as always. But for Tala and Jake, the feeling that something deep and unbreakable had changed between them never faded. Every day they spent together seemed to reaffirm the journey they had taken, not just as man and animal, but as two souls who had found each other amidst chaos and suffering. Tala's recovery, though physical, was not just a matter of care, it was the healing of a broken spirit. And she showed it with every small gesture. At home, she was happier than ever. She ran through the halls with Ziggy, bounding with the energy of an animal that now knew what love was. Jake watched her play, moved by how much Tala's life had changed. And with her, his life too. On a Saturday morning, the sun streamed gently through the living room window. Jake sat on the couch, working on his computer. Beside him, Tala, her trust restored, lay at his feet, her head resting on his lap. Ziggy, as always, was nearby, wrestling with a tennis ball, his small teeth gleaming as he caught and dropped it on the floor. Jake looked at Tala with a quiet smile, gently stroking her fur. "You have taught me so much," Jake thought, unable to put into words all that the dog meant to him. She had taught him the importance of fighting for what you believe in, the power of forgiveness, and above all, the unwavering capacity to start over, no matter how deep the wound. And in that moment, as the sound of silence stretched between them, Tala stood up. Without rushing, with the tenderness he had never seen in her, she went to the window, looked out, and then turned her gaze to him. It was as if she were saying, "I am ready now. I know my place in the world is here with you." Jake slowly stood up, walked toward her, and knelt down to meet her eyes. He looked at her, and as he saw the trust reflected in her eyes, the pain of her story seemed to vanish. No more words were needed. What they had experienced was etched in their hearts. The bond between them needed no explanation, it was too evident. That day, Tala was officially adopted by Jake. The signature on the documents not only formalized the legal adoption but also the promise of a life lived together. They were home, not just physically, but in a way that transcended everything they had experienced. Every playful bark from Ziggy, every mothersome cuddle, was a testament to love, regeneration, and the power to overcome. Tala's eyes, once scarred by the pain of abandonment, now shone with the light of trust. The animal who was once lost and left to fate was now a loved member of a family. And Jake, the man who once found an abandoned dog on the roadside, now knew the true meaning of saving. Late that afternoon, they went for a walk. The sun was setting, painting the sky in gold and pink. Tala, happier than ever, ran ahead of Jake and Ziggy. The three of them walked down the quiet street like a family who had finally found their place after facing the adversity of life. Returning home as darkness fell, Jake sat on the couch, and Tala climbed up next to him, snuggling close. It was as if she knew that in that moment, the most important thing was that they were together. And in that small gesture, that simple act of snuggling, there was the certainty that the future for them was filled with love, safety, and above all, peace. Tala's story was no longer about abandonment or pain, it was a story of regeneration, the power of love and courage, and a new beginning. And next to Jake, she now knew that her happy ending was not just a possibility, but a reality. And in the warmth of their embrace, what began as a single act of abandonment had turned into a story that would be a testament to hope, perseverance, and the fact that somewhere, at the end of every dark road, there is always a second chance.